I apologize. Professional streamer here. Professionalism is what we aim for. Yeah, so yesterday was Warhammer Wednesday. It's pretty fun. And today is Thematic Thursday, and of course, as everybody knows, our latest theme has just been a continuation of our Monday mythology streams. We are reading Beowulf. So today is part 4, so the 4th installment. I think we will... It's not going to be too much longer. Probably today and then Monday. Maybe another Thursday. Beowulf is not very long. It's not a long poem. Hey, Pete Wiz. Hey, Rabid Wombat. No, we're not going to finish today. There'll definitely be at least a part 5. Depending on how quickly I read. Or how much there is to talk about, I suppose. But it's always fun to talk about things, right? Yeah, so where did we leave off? Well, the mighty Beowulf. He had conquered Grendel in Hrothgar's hall, just pulled off his arm, and then let the monster run away to go and die in its home. And then they followed the monster down into the depths, whereas we heard from Hrothgar that earlier people had just seen Grendel and his mom just walking around and going down into their undersea cave, which was a weird note. But Beowulf headed down there, fought Mom, beat her, killed her with a sword made for and by giants of a previous age, and then used the sword to behead Grendel, who was already dead. And the sword dissolved, but he brought back up... Ooh... New emote. Thank you so much. Ooh, that's interesting. What is that? New emote. Cool. Thank you so much for the continuing subscription. Very much appreciate that. Yeah, so he brought back up only two things from that mighty underwater hall. The hilt of that giant sword, and then the head, of course, the head of Grendel. Went back, showed it to Hrothgar, gave him the hilt of that sword, and then Beowulf got a bunch of treasure from Hrothgar, and is about to set off home. Having defeated all the monsters, what's left to do but go home? And that is where we pick up. Chapter 27. And remember, these chapters they're very brief, so there's always... We'll have time to talk about stuff in between. So hello to any lurkers. Lurking is awesome as well. If you have any comments, I'll get to them in between chapters. So here we go. Chapter 27. Hey, Zenblade. We'll see how loud the kids are going to be today. Let me turn the microphone that way. All right. So they're about to leave for home. Chapter 27. Then the band of Geats, young and brave, marching in their ring-locked armor, reached the shore. The coast guard saw them coming and about to go, as he'd seen them before. He hurried down the hillside, whipping his horse, but this time shouted no challenge, told them only how the Geats would be watching too, and would welcome such warriors in shining mail. Their broad-beamed ship lay bobbing at the edge of the sand. They loaded it high with armor and horses and all the rich treasure it could hold. The mast stood high and straight over heaped-up wealth, Hrothgar's, and now theirs. Beowulf rewarded the boat's watchman, who had stayed behind, with a sword that had hammered gold wound on its handle. The weapon brought him honor. Then the ship left shore, left Denmark, traveled through deep water. Deck timbers creaked, and the wind billowing through the sails stretched from the mast, tied tight with ropes, did not hold them back, did not keep the ring-proud ship from foaming swiftly through the waves, the sea currents, across the wide ocean until they could see familiar headlands, cliffs that sprang out of Geatish soil. Driven by the wind, the ship rammed high on the shore. Harbor guards came running to greet them, men who for days had waited and watched for their beloved comrades to come crossing the waves. They anchored the high-bowed ship, moored it close to the shore, where the booming sea could not pull it loose and lead it away. Then they carried up the golden armor, the ancient swords, the jewels, brought them to Higlac's home, their ring-giver's hall near the sea, where he lived surrounded by his followers. He was a famous king with a fitting high hall and a wife, Hygd, young but wise, and knowing beyond her years. She was Hareth's daughter, a noble queen with none of the niggardly ways of women like Thrith. Hygd gave the Geats gifts with open hands, but Thrith was too proud, an imperious princess with a vicious tongue, and so fierce and wild that her father's followers averted their eyes as she passed, knowing that if anyone but their king watched where she walked, her hands would shape a noose to fit their necks. She would lie, her father's lieutenants would write out her warrants, and he who had stared would end his life on the edge of an ancient sword. And how great a sin for a woman, whether fair or black, to create fear and destruction, for a woman, who should walk in the ways of peace, to kill with pretended insults. But Hemming's kinsman tamed her. His hall guests told a different story, spread the news that Thrith had forgotten her gory tricks once her wise father had sent her to a wedding with Offa, married her to that brave young soldier, sent her across the yellow-green sea to that gold-adorned champion, a fierce fighter in war or peace. They praised her now for her generous heart and her goodness, and the high and most noble paths she walked, filled with adoring love for that leader of warriors, her husband. He was a man as brave and strong and good, it is said, as anyone on this earth, a spear-bold soldier who knew no fear, exalted with gifts, victorious in war, a king who ruled his native land wisely and well. Emer was his son, Hemming's kinsman, Garmund's grandson, a powerful swordsman and his warrior's shield. Yes, of course, everyone is always welcome to lurk, whether you're listening, eating, bored, doing something else. It's all good. Well, that was an interesting chapter. So we get the departure of Beowulf and the Geats from Denmark. They wave goodbye to the Coast Guard. Bye. The same one who saw them when they first arrived and challenged them. Their trip is very quick and unremarkable. They get home and they start to unload the treasure, and then we hear about some of the ladies in Geatland, and it's some stories of warning about women. And yeah, as we've talked about this the last couple times, women not necessarily portrayed all that great in Beowulf. I'm not sure exactly who all these people are that we hear about. Thrith. But yeah, there's some warnings about women who are not particularly nice to men. This one who, if someone looks at her as she's walking by, she tells her lieutenants to go and kill them. There was something I wanted to mention. Oh, I know. Oh, yeah, so we get these cool epithets, right? Because it's an epic poem. You have to have epithets. Things are described the same way over and over again. It gives the poet little cues to remember this long thing that he's reading or singing. So it talks about ring-locked armor. And that's a really... I love that phrase. And all it means is that they have... it's chainmail. So it's rings that are locked together. Many rings. So again, just a fancy, poetic, cool sounding way of describing something that's fairly mundane. Lots of rings all over the place, right? The ship is ring proud, I believe. So on the prow of the ship there are rings. I don't know exactly what that is referring to, but some sort of decoration. Yeah. And also something cool here. So if you read Homer, most times that Homer refers to the ocean, it is what's usually translated as the wine dark sea, right? But here, very oddly, maybe, we get, where was it? The yellow green sea. which is not usually a color combination that we hear of for the ocean. Yeah. Were they thrifty, perhaps? I mean, they should be, if not before then after this. Chapter 28. Then Beowulf and his men went walking along the shore, down to the broad strip of sand. The world's bright candle shone, hurrying up from the south. It was a short journey from their ship to Higlac's home, to the hall where their king, Ongentho's killer, lived with his warriors and gave treasures away. They walked quickly. The young king knew they were back, Beowulf and his handful of brave men, come safely home. He sat now, waiting to see them, to greet his battle comrades when they arrived at his court. They came. And when Beowulf had bowed to his lord, and standing in front of the throne had solemnly spoken loyal words, Hygelac ordered him to sit at his side. He, who had survived, sailed home victorious, next to his kinsman and king. Mead cups were filled, and Harith's daughter took them through the hall, carried ale to her husband's comrades. Hygelac, unable to stay silent, anxious to know how Beowulf's adventure had gone, began to question him, courteous, but eager to be told everything. Beloved Beowulf, tell us what your trip to far-off places brought you, your sudden expedition on this salty waves, your search for war in Heorot. Did you end Hrothgar's hopeless misery? Could you help that glorious king? Grendel's savagery lay heavy on my heart, but I was afraid to let you go to him. For a long time I held you here, kept you safe, forced you to make the Danes fight their own battles. God be praised that my eyes have beheld you once more unharmed. Beowulf spoke, Edgitho's brave son. My lord Hygelac, my meeting with Grendel and the nighttime battle we fought are known to everyone in Denmark, where the monster was once the uncrowned ruler, murdering and eating Hrothgar's people, forever bringing them misery. I ended his reign, avenged his crimes so completely in the crashing darkness that not even the oldest of his evil kind will ever boast, lying in sin and deceit, that the monster beat me. I sought out Hrothgar first, came to him in his hall. When Healfdane's famous son heard that I'd come to challenge Grendel, he gave me a seat of honor alongside his son. His followers were drinking. I joined their feast, sat with that band, as bright and loud-tongued as any I'd ever seen. His famous queen went back and forth, hurrying the cup-bearing boys, giving bracelets and rings to her husband's warriors. I heard the oldest soldiers of all the calling for ale from Hrothgar's daughter's hands, and Friau was the way they greeted her when she gave them the golden cups. And Hrothgar will give her to Ingeld, gracious Froda's son. She and that ripening soldier will be married, the Danes' great lord and protector has declared, hoping that his quarrel with the Hatho-bards can be settled by a woman. He's wrong. How many wars have been put to rest in a prince's bed? Few. A bride can bring a little peace, make spears silent for a time, but not long. Ingeld and all his men will be drinking in the hall when the wedding is done and Friau is his wife. The Danes will be wearing gleaming armor and ring-marked old swords, and the prince and his people will remember those treasures, will remember that their fathers once wore them, fell with those helmets on their heads, those swords in their hands. All right, so Beowulf is going to tell the story of what happened. But he tells a story of what we didn't hear before, that he goes to sit down at Hrothgar's behest to have a feast and drinks, and then we hear about these other women serving drinks, and then stories about them, and how, you know what, sure, women can be used for political marriages to make peace, but it never lasts very long, and that's not the best way of doing things. I know, right? Yeah, and definitely, the ancient people had a lot of ways of describing ocean colors. Again, which can be really interesting to read those and try to figure out, like, what did they mean? What time of day might they have been referring to? We know that in certain places, obviously in certain places around the world, the the ocean color is very different depending on the depth, the mineral content around different islands. It can be very different. Places I've traveled to, there's been very different colors, which is really cool to see. So yeah, lots of neat descriptions. Yeah, Eridansk, it's the women's stuff is kind of rough sometimes. Maybe he had a few bad relationships. Yeah, he's like that ex-girlfriend of mine. I'm gonna get her. I'm gonna talk about how bad women can be in my poem, and it's gonna live on forever. I'll show her. Chapter 29. Beowulf continues his story. Oh, and Aaron, yeah, that's a good question. There are a lot of rings going on in here and in other stories as well. I think rings are they're easy to make, and it's such an important symbol. I mean, every ancient culture, even modern cultures, like rings and circles, never ending, that whole thing. It's just so widely used. Like I said, it was easy to make, even for ancient people who were not super sophisticated, could make rings as like little rings, and then rings as decorations on things. Yeah. Jormungandr circles the earth and bites his own tail. So there's like even creatures and mythological elements that are rings, circles. Chapter 29. And seeing their ancestral armor and weapons, Ingeld and his followers will be angry. And one of his soldiers, sitting with ale in his cup and bitterness heavy in his heart, will remember war and death. And while he sits and drinks, his sharp old tongue will begin to tempt some younger warrior, pushing and probing for a new war. That sword, that precious old blade over there, I think you know it, friend. Your father carried it, fought with it the last time he could swing a sword. The Danes killed him, and many more of our men, and stripped the dead bodies. The brave, bold Danes. One of the princess's people here now might be the murderer's son, boasting about his treasures, his ancient armor, which ought to be yours by right. Bitter words will work in a hot-tempered brain, pushing up thoughts of the past, and then, when he can, calling his father's name, the youngster will kill some innocent Dane, a servant, and bloody sword in hand will run from the hall, knowing his way through the woods. But war will begin as he runs, to the sound of broken oaths, and its heat will dry up Ingeld's heart, leave him indifferent to his Danish bride. Hrothgar may think the Hathobards love him, loving Friau, but the friendship can't last. The vows are worthless. But of Grendel you need to know more to know everything. I ought to go on. It was early in the evening. Heaven's jewel had slid to its rest, and the jealous monster planning murder came seeking us out, stalking us as we guarded Hrothgar's hall. Honshu, sleeping in his armor, was the first Geat he reached. Grendel seized him, tore him apart, swallowed him down, feet and all, as fate had decreed. A glorious young soldier, killed in his prime. Yet Grendel had only begun his bloody work, meant to leave us with his belly and his pouch both full, and Heorot half empty. Then he tested his strength against mine, hand to hand. His pouch hung at his side, a huge bag sewn from a dragon's skin, worked with a devil's skill. It was closed by a marvelous clasp. The monster intended to take me, put me inside, save me for another meal. He was bold and strong, but once I stood on my feet, his strength was useless, and it failed him. Dun dun dun. Eridan's, yes, I can remember seeing, I don't know exactly where or when, but I can remember seeing like the cross guard of a sword, or the top of the, I sometimes forget all my sword parts, the pommel, the hilt, a cross guard, I think, with like sword, a ring, a repeated ring motif decoration. So yeah, not necessarily attached, but like engraved almost, or embossed, something like that. So we keep getting this story of this this princess thing, and then like old dudes being upset and young dudes picking up on that anger and picking up swords and attacking people. I don't know. I don't know what this is all about. And I looked in the back to see if if these people appear in the genealogy, and they do not. So, just stories to keep in mind. Watch out for women. Watch out for old grudges and and wanting to go and kill people. But then he says, "Aha! Now let me tell you about Grendel." So we finally get the name of that poor Geet, who was the first person that Grendel came upon and killed before meeting up with Beowulf, and it was Hondshu. I'm gonna spell that out because it's a weird one. Hondshu. Is that right? Hondshu. That name is not in my book. And then he talks about Grendel and his pouch, and we hear, okay, so it's earlier when we first heard the reference to the pouch, I thought it was a physical pouch, part of his body, an anatomical pouch. But no, it's like a man purse he's carrying, and that he puts his victims in sometimes when he doesn't just eat them outright. His pouch hung at his side, a huge bag sewn from a dragon's skin, worked with a devil's skill. It was closed by a marvelous clasp. So he's just got, yeah, he's got a fanny pack. We don't get any sense that Grendel has any clothing, but he's got a pouch for putting his little treasures in. Yeah. All right. Chapter 30. Gotta have a way to carry so. Yeah, I guess. I mean, you can't eat everything there. You got to take some home for later, some leftovers. Chapter 30. The whole tale of how I killed him, repaid him in kind for all the evil he'd done, would take too long. Your people, my prince, were honored in the doing. He escaped, found a few minutes of life, but his hand, his whole right arm, stayed in Heorot. The miserable creature crept away, dropped to the bottom of his lake, half dead as he fell. When the sun had returned, the Danes' great king poured out treasure, repaid me in hammered gold for the bloody battle I'd fought in his name. He ordered a feast. There were songs and the telling of tales. One ancient Dane told of long dead times, and sometimes Hrothgar himself, with the harp in his lap, stroked its silvery strings and told wonderful stories, a brave king reciting unhappy truths about good and evil. And sometimes he wove his stories on the mournful thread of old age, remembering buried strength in the battles it had won. He would weep, the old king, wise with many winters, remembering what he'd done once, what he'd seen, what he knew. And so we sat the day away feasting. Then darkness fell again, and Grendel's mother was waiting, ready for revenge, hating the Danes for her son's death. The monstrous hag succeeded, burst boldly into Heorot, and killed Escher, one of the king's oldest and wisest soldiers. But when the sun shone once more, the death-weary Danes could not build a pyre and burn his beloved body, lay him on flaming logs, return ashes to dust. She'd carried away his corpse, brought it to her den deep in the water. Hrothgar had wept for many of his men, but this time his heart melted. This was the worst. He begged me, in your name, half weeping as he spoke, to seek still greater glory deep in the swirling waves, to win still higher fame and the gifts he would give me. Down in that surging lake I sought and found her, the horrible hag, fierce and wild. We fought, clutching and grasping. The water ran red with blood, and at last, with a mighty sword that had hung on the wall, I cut off her head. I had barely escaped with my life. My death was not written. And the Danes' protector, Healfdane's great son, heaped up treasures and precious jewels to reward me. Interesting that Beowulf at the beginning of this chapter says, the tale of killing Grendel the whole tale would take too long. Meanwhile, every chapter in this story is 2 pages, 2.5 pages at most, and the action is always very, very quick. So the retelling, even though he says I'm gonna make it brief, I can't include all the details. The retelling is still almost as long as the original one. Thank you for the follow, Bantapause 666. Yeah, so he does skip over some of the details, but it is still a very quick story. Okay. Imagine, yeah, if he retold everything, it would take so long. Obviously, though, we do get. So Beowulf is not a long poem, right? It's not a long story. But even so, we get the same story repeated, several of the same stories repeated several times throughout the book. So it's really not a long story. And there was something else I want to talk about here. Yeah, so the mother comes, Grendel's mom comes, and they have to go down and get. Oh, we get more details about after Grendel. That was paid by the word, exactly. So after Grendel's death, we know that there was feasting. We heard about that before, but here we get news that Hrothgar had a harp and was singing and was telling ancient tales. It's like, well, that wasn't in the book before. So at least we get more details when stories are retold in here. So that's nice. It's not just like the same exact details over and over again. Poor Hrothgar. Yeah. On multiple occasions here, we get notes that he's really old. Like, not just old, he's really old. And like, he just thinks about the good old days, and he gets tired really easily, and he's sad, and he weeps, and he's like really old. He was probably 40, but you know, a different time. Okay, so excuse me. Beowulf continues. Moving on to chapter 31. So he just talked about how he succeeded, was given treasure by Hrothgar. He lived his life as a good king must. I lost nothing, none of the gifts my strength could have earned me. He opened his store of gems and armor, let me choose as I liked, so I could bring his riches to you, my ruler, and prove his friendship and my love. Your favor still governs my life. I have almost no family, Hygelac, almost no one now but you. Then Beowulf ordered them to bring in the boar head banner, the towering helmet, the ancient silvery armor, and the gold-carved sword. This war gear was Hrothgar's reward, my gift from his wise old hands. He wanted me to tell you, first, whose treasures these were. Haregar had owned them, his older brother, who was king of Denmark, until death gave Hrothgar the throne. But Haregar kept them, would not give them to Hereward, his brave young son, though the boy had proved his loyalty. These are yours, may they serve you well. And after the gleaming armor 4 horses were led in, 4 bays, swift and all alike. Beowulf had brought his king horses and treasure, as a man must, not weaving nets of malice for his comrades, preparing their death in the dark with secret cunning tricks. Hygelac trusted his nephew, leaned on his strength in war, each of them intent on the other's joy. And Beowulf gave Wealhtheow's gift, her wonderful necklace, to Hygd, Hygelac's queen, and gave her also 3 supple, graceful, saddle-bright horses. She received his presents, then wore that wonderful jewel on her breast. So Edgitho's son proved himself, did as a famous soldier must do if glory is what he seeks, not killing his comrades in drunken rages, his heart not savage, but guarding God's gracious gift, his strength, using it only in war, and then using it bravely. And yet as a boy he was scorned. The Geats considered him worthless. When he sat in their mead hall and their lord was making men rich, he held no claim on the king's goodwill. They were sure he was lazy, noble, but slow. The world spun round, he was a warrior more famous than any, and all the insults were wiped out. Then Higlac, protector of his people, brought in his father's, Beowulf's grandfather's, great sword, worked in gold. None of the Geats could boast of a better weapon. He laid it in Beowulf's lap, then gave him 7,000 hides of land, houses and ground and all. Geatland was home for both king and prince. Their fathers had left them buildings and fields. But Higlac's inheritance stretched further. It was he who was king and was followed. Afterwards, in the time when Higlac was dead and Herdred, his son, who'd ruled the Geats after his father, had followed him into darkness, killed in battle with the Swedes, who smashed his shield, cut through the soldiers surrounding their king. Then, when Hig's one son was gone, Beowulf ruled in Geatland, took the throne he'd refused once, and held it long and well. He was old with years and wisdom, 50 winters a king, when a dragon awoke from its darkness and dreams, and brought terror to his people. The beast had slept in a huge stone tower with a hidden path beneath. A man stumbled upon the entrance, went in, discovered the ancient treasure, the pagan jewels and gold the dragon had been guarding, and dazzled and greedy stole a gem-studded cup and fled. But now the dragon hid nothing, neither the theft nor itself. It swept through the darkness, and all Geatland knew its anger. Yikes. Yeah, lots of stuff about old dudes just having regrets. All right, so we get back to the story. Beowulf is still telling the story, and he says, killed Grendel's mom, and then, all these gifts were given upon me. Bring them on in, fellas! They bring it in, and he presents the gifts to Higlac. We've got the helmet, the shield, the banner, the sword, the horses, all this stuff. And he hands them over. And he notes that Hrothgar's brother didn't give them to his son. They kept him around, so Hrothgar was able to give them to Beowulf, to give them to Higlac. Blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, they're lady gifts, right? Because Hrothgar's wife, the queen there, gave Beowulf things to give then to his queen. And then, so then there's this really interesting point here, right in the middle of that chapter. Beowulf proved himself, did as a famous soldier must do, if glory is what he seeks, not killing his comrades in drunken rages, but using it only in war and using it bravely. And then it says that as a kid, everybody thought he was worthless. They were sure he was lazy and slow. And then he became a mighty warrior and wiped out those insults. So that's kind of weird. And again, it's like, well, why is that? Are there these notes in here? I would hazard a guess that many mighty warriors are slow. I would hazard a guess that maybe these are notes to differentiate this tale from older Norse stories in which the heroes, even the gods, are drunkards and prone to wild swings of emotion and fighting their own friends and family just as often as they're fighting enemies. Possibly that's something in there. We've already seen in the Odyssey and in the Argonautica definite elements of the text that show that the heroes of those tales are different from the heroes that have come before, right? Odysseus is not the same kind of hero that Achilles was. Jason is certainly not the same kind of hero as either Achilles or Odysseus was. So different kinds of flaws in different generations and how they deal with it. So probably something about that. I don't know why Beowulf was considered lazy and slow as a young man, but then became a great warrior. It's kind of an interesting note, though. So then there's a jump, and I wonder what it looks like in the original manuscript. But on the page, there's like a line break here when it jumps ahead to it. Basically, it's a little bit of a time skip, right? We jump ahead to Higlac is dead and his son is dead. And then who do the Geats proclaim to be king? finally, Beowulf becomes king of Geatland. And then we do another skip. It's been 50 years. And sadly, somebody has stumbled across a dragon. Now, kind of cool. This dragon lives in a huge stone tower. It's not underground. It's not in a cave. Dragon lives in a tower. Has a great hoard. Somebody managed to wander in there and steals a gem-studded cup. And the dragon is pissed. We have child things happening. Chapter 32. Was it Bilbo? It might have been. But the thief had not come to steal. He stole and roused the dragon, not from desire, but need. He was someone's slave, had been beaten by his masters, had run from all men's sight, but with no place to hide, then he found the hidden path and used it. Hey, I am reading with my hat on for my show, yes, because I didn't comb my hair this morning. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, good. Yes. Bigger and bigger. The story is getting bigger and bigger. There's a dragon in the story now. Oh. You're not impressed? Okay. Back to the story. So it's a slave who wandered into the dragon's den. And once inside, seeing the sleeping beast, staring as it yawned and stretched, not wanting to wake it, terror struck, he turned and ran for his life, taking the jeweled cup. That tower was heaped high with hidden treasure, stored there years before by the last survivor of a noble race, ancient riches left in the darkness as the end of a dynasty came. Death had taken them one by one, and the warrior who watched over all that remained mourning their fate, expecting soon the same for himself, knowing the gold and jewels he had guarded so long could not bring him pleasure much longer. He brought the precious cups, the armor, and the ancient swords to a stone tower built near the sea, below a cliff, a sealed fortress with no windows, no doors, waves in front of it, rocks behind. Then he spoke. Take these treasures, Earth, now that no one living can enjoy them. They were yours in the beginning. Allow them to return. War and terror have swept away my people, shut their eyes to delight and to living, closed the door to all gladness. No one is left to lift these swords, polish these jeweled cups. No one leads, no one follows. These hammered helmets worked with gold will tarnish and crack. The hands that should clean and polish them are still forever. And these mail shirts, worn in battle once, while swords crashed and blades bit into shields and men, will rust away like the warriors who owned them. None of these treasures will travel to distant lands following their lords. The harp's bright song, the hawk crossing through the hall on its swift wings, the stallion tramping in the courtyard, all gone, creatures of every kind and their masters hurled to the grave. And so he spoke sadly of those long dead, and lived from day to day joyless, until at last, death touched his heart and took him too. And a stalker in the night, a flaming dragon, found the treasure unguarded. He whom men fear came flying through the darkness, wrapped in fire, seeking caves and stone-split ruins, but finding gold. Then it stayed, buried itself with heathen silver and jewels it could neither use nor ever abandon. So mankind's enemy, the mighty beast, slept in those stone walls for hundreds of years. A runaway slave roused it, stole a jeweled cup, and bought his master's forgiveness, begged for mercy, and was pardoned when his delighted lord took the present he bore, turned it in his hands, and stared at the ancient carvings. The cup brought peace to a slave, pleased his master, but stirred a dragon's anger. It turned, hunting the thief's tracks, and found them, saw where its visitor had come and gone. He'd survived, had come close enough to touch its scaly head, and yet lived, as it lifted its cavernous jaws through the grace of Almighty God and a pair of quiet, quick-moving feet. The dragon followed his steps, anxious to find the man who had robbed it of silver and sleep. It circled around and around the tower, determined to catch him, but could not. He had run too fast. The wilderness was empty. The beast went back to its treasure, planning a bloody revenge, and found what was missing, saw what thieving hands had stolen. Then it crouched on the stones, counting off the hours till the Almighty's candle went out, and evening came, and wild with anger it could fly, burning across the land, killing and destroying with its breath. Then the sun was gone, and its heart was glad. Glowing with rage, it left the tower, impatient to repay its enemies. The people suffered. Everyone lived in terror. But when Beowulf had learned of their trouble, his fate was worse, and came quickly. Dun, dun, dun. Beware the wrath of smoke. People come... Well, I mean, look. I mean, it's... Without doing something to it, this thing looks a little weird. It kind of turns into like a mushroom. So, yeah, I'm just going to keep the hat on for today. Children, but yeah, Max was not impressed by the story. So this is a really, really cool chapter. So previously, in the previous chapter, we heard that, okay, a man had randomly come across this path that led into a stone tower where the dragon had its hoard, its treasure, right? And took the cup, and that roused the dragon. But now we get further details. It wasn't a thief. Well, I mean, he was a thief, but he didn't come with thoughts of stealing. It was a slave that had run away, a slave who was in trouble, ran away, came across it, and then couldn't resist taking something to bring back to the slave's master to appease him for whatever the trouble was. But even so, and again, there's no sense, at least in this chapter, I don't know if we're going to hear more about it, but these ancient people had a view of slaves and lower class people, you might say, that's appears to be more like ancient people like the Romans, in that depending on your life circumstances, anybody could end up being a slave. They're trying to use the right words here. A slave is not necessarily someone who is morally less than another person, just by life's experiences and the situation, is a slave in station, if that makes sense. So again, we don't hear that this person, this slave, was wicked, was wrong to run away. Like there's very little moral judgment here about the slave or the situation, which I think is interesting. Yeah. So anyway, and then we hear about why this dragon has this hoard of treasure, and it's a great story. That where's the number here? Because it actually gives us a number. The tower was heaped high with hidden treasure, stored there years before. But where's... Hold on. I know I said it. Windows. Shoot. I can't find it. But it was something about like 100 years, hundreds of years. Bah. I know it was in there somewhere. Oh, well, can't find it now. Slavery is still bad for sure, but again, different societies and cultures throughout the years have had very different views of how slavery worked and who was a slave, who could become a slave, how you got out of being a slave. It's an interesting historical thing to look at, and the portrayal. Yes. So what it turns out is that there was an ancient noble race of people who had amazing treasure, amazing worked goods, armor and shields and weapons and things like that. And yeah, and they died out. They died off. So there was the last remaining person from that race of people built this stone storehouse for this treasure. And it was a stone storehouse with no windows, no doors, no way in or out. And talked, and we even hear the words of this ancient person. Who knows what they are? But take these treasures, Earth, now that no one living can enjoy them. They were yours in the beginning. Allow them to return, because it's a storehouse of things that were made from metal and stone. So he's giving it back to the Earth, which is a cool idea. Again, we've already somewhere before I forgot to mention it explicitly, but there was something about it was recently, but about ashes. It was essentially ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? And again, this is a Christian tale, so there are elements of biblical ideas, right? And so that's definitely part of it here, right? You're giving ashes, dust to dust. It's things that were brought up out of the earth, worked into weapons, used, and now they are going back into the earth, which is a very, very cool idea. But then even that guy dies, and this storehouse of ancient weapons and armor is just left alone. And then the dragon just happens to come across it, moves in, comes really liking it. And then we hear too that this dragon is the dragon's like sheathed in fire as he flies around, which is kind of a cool image. Oh yeah, here it is. So no. So so that ancient race dies out, and then the dragon finds it, and the dragon slept in those stone walls for hundreds of years. So again, you can think of like the timeline here. The dragon has been there hundreds of years. That's after the dragon found the treasure. So who knows how long it had been since the last guardian of that race was there, and then how many years it had been since that race had died out. So we're talking, you could say like 1,000 years before. So like, are they trying to reference? We've talked about how the Greeks saw, from their perspective, ancient structures that had been built, but like the palace at Mycenae, and the ancient Greeks didn't realize how the people that far before could have built these massive structures. One second. Can we? Yeah, we gotta turn off. We gotta turn off Cody. Okay. Okay, that'll turn off in just a moment. But there's a trend all across ancient people who saw things that had survived from a previous age, and ancient aliens, exactly. And like couldn't comprehend how these people so far ancient, even to their point of view, could have built these magical things, this amazing armor, these giant structures. That's where we get that's where we get the ideas of what they called cyclopean structures. Like they're like, people couldn't have built these giant stone walls. It must have been a band of cyclops. Giants must have lived here before. So again, like just really, really cool stories, sort of behind the stories. Hudsonizer, yeah, there's nothing nerdy about all that stuff. But now the dragon is pissed, and he waits. We have a couple of times we've heard this epithets, the Almighty's candle, which is just the sun. So the sun goes down, and the dragon's like, aha, nighttime is the right time. And glowing with rage, because again, this dragon is just fiery all over. And he's heading to Beowulf. And we hear at the very end of this chapter that when Beowulf had learned of their trouble, his fate was worse and came quickly. Oh wait, is that the fate of the dragon or the fate of Beowulf? People suffered, everyone lived in. I'm not sure, actually. It could go both ways there. Interesting. All right, chapter 33. Are you ready? Yeah, that phrase is odd. Chapter 33. Vomiting fire and smoke, the dragon burned down their homes. They watched in horror as the flames rose up. The angry monster meant to leave nothing alive. And the signs of its anger flickered and glowed in the darkness, visible for miles. Tokens of its hate and cruelty spread like a warning to the Geats who had broken its rest. Then it hurried back to its tower, to its hidden treasure, before dawn could come. It had wrapped its flames around the Geats. Now it trusted in stone walls and its strength to protect it. But they would not. Then they came to Beowulf, their king, and announced that his hall, his throne, the best of buildings, had melted away in the dragon's burning breath. Their words brought misery. Beowulf's sorrow beat at his heart. He accused himself of breaking God's law, of bringing the Almighty's anger down on his people. Reproach pounded in his breast, gloomy and dark, and the world seemed a different place. But the hall was gone. The dragon's molten breath had licked across it, burned it to ashes near the shore it had guarded. The Geats deserved revenge. Beowulf, their leader and lord, began to plan it, ordered a battle shield shaped of iron, knowing that wood would be useless, that no linden shield could help him, protect him in the flaming heat of the beast's breath. That noble prince would end his days on earth soon, would leave this brief life, but would take the dragon with him, tear it from the heaped-up treasure it had guarded so long. And he'd go to it alone, scorning to lead soldiers against such an enemy. He saw nothing to fear, thought nothing of the beast's claws, or wings, or flaming jaws. He had fought before against worse odds, had survived, been victorious in harsher battles, beginning in Heorot, Hrothgar's unlucky hall. He'd killed Grendel and his mother, swept that murdering tribe away. And he'd fought in Higlac's war with the Frisians, fought at his lord's side till a sword reached out and drank Higlac's blood, till a blade swung in the rush of battle killed the Geats' great king. Then Beowulf escaped, broke through Frisian shields and swam to freedom, saving 30 sets of armor from the scavenging Franks, river people who robbed the dead as they floated by. Beowulf offered them only his sword, ended so many jackal lives that the few who were able skulked silently home, glad to leave him. So Beowulf swam sadly back to Geatland, almost the only survivor of a foolish war. Higlac's widow brought him the crown, offered him the kingdom, not trusting Heardred, her son and Higlac's, to beat off foreign invaders. But Beowulf refused to rule when his lord's own son was alive, and the leaderless Geats could choose a rightful king. He gave Heardred all his support, offering an open heart where Higlac's young son could see wisdom he still lacked himself. Warmth and good were still what Beowulf brought his new king. But Swedish exiles came seeking protection. They were rebels against Onela, Healfdane's son-in-law and the best ring-giver his people had ever known. And Onela came too, a mighty king, marched on Geatland with a huge army. Heardred had given his word, and now he gave his life, shielding the Swedish strangers. Onela wanted nothing more. When Heardred had fallen, that famous warrior went back to Sweden. Let Beowulf rule. Okay. A couple things here. Yes, vomiting, fire, and smoke. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like a volcano eruption. I definitely agree. So the dragon comes in. Dragon is pissed. Starts burning everything down. People go, they rush to Beowulf, wake him up. Sire, sire, your hall, your throne, the best of buildings, it's gone. The dragon's flame, and again, if you were a math person, a physics person, you could calculate the heat of the dragon's flames because it melts the stone. So again, if you go Again, I'm sure somebody's done it, but this would be a cool experiment or a cool road of inquiry, right? Go research what stone was in ancient Geatland, what stone they were likely to have used to build a structure, and then calculate the temperature, the heat it would require to break down and melt that stone. And you can figure out the heat of this dragon's flame breath, which would be cool. Like I said, I got to imagine somebody has done this work before. Yes, it is. Yes, Robin Wombat. The technical term is very hot. And then interesting, too, that Beowulf's first reaction is not, ho, let's go to fight the dragon. No, Beowulf's first reaction is, I'm so sorry. I must have done something to anger Lord our God, the Almighty, to bring down his anger upon our people. And he's sad. But he does say, I will get revenge on that dragon. Go make me an iron shield. Wood's just not going to cut it, as we know. And he says, I'm going to go by myself. I'm not taking anybody else. And then we get a little bit of story about past battles. And again, 2 chapters ago, we heard that Hygelac had died, his son had died, and Beowulf became king. But here we get, it's a little bit more complicated than just a chain of succession, right? Hygelac died, and then his wife said, Beowulf, you should be king. I don't trust my own son. And Beowulf said, no. The son should be king first before I become king. I will give this young man all of my wisdom, all of my knowledge. I will support him. And then we get this chain of like weird battles with the Swedes. And then it's in one of those battles that Hygelac's son dies. And then Beowulf can become king. And that's important. That's a good note there. All right, one more chapter. Chapter 34. But Beowulf remembered how his king had been killed. As soon as he could, he lent the last of the Swedish rebels soldier and gold, helped him to a bitter battle across the wide sea, where victory and revenge and the Swedish throne were won, and Onela was slain. So Edgitho's son survived, no matter what dangers he met, what battles he fought, brave and forever triumphant, till the day fate sent him to the dragon and sent him death. A dozen warriors walked with their angry king when he was brought to the beast. Beowulf knew by then what had woken the monster and enraged it. The cup had come to him, traveled from dragon to slave, to master, to king, and the slave was their guide, had begun the Geats' affliction, and now, afraid of both beast and men, was forced to lead them to the monster's hidden home. He showed them the huge stones set deep in the ground, with the sea beating on the rocks close by. Beowulf stared, listening to stories of the gold and riches hidden inside. Hidden, but wakeful now, the dragon waited, ready to greet him. Gold and hammered armor have been buried in pleasanter places. The battle-brave king rested on the shore while his soldiers wished him well, urged him on. But Beowulf's heart was heavy. His soul sensed how close fate had come, felt something, not fear, but knowledge of old age. His armor was strong, but his arm hung like his heart. Body and soul might part here, his blood might be spilled, his spirit torn from his flesh. Then he spoke. My early days were full of war, and I survived it all. I can remember everything. I was 7 years old when Hrethel opened his home and his heart for me, when my king and lord took me from my father and kept me, taught me, gave me gold and pleasure, glad that I sat at his knee. And he never loved me less than any of his sons, Herbald, the oldest of all, or Hathsin, or Hygelac, my lord. Herbald died a horrible death, killed while hunting. Hathsin, his brother, stretched his horn-tipped bow, sent an arrow flying, but missed his mark, and hit Hairbald instead, found him with a bloody point and pierced him through. The crime was great, the guilt was plain, but nothing could be done. No vengeance, no death to repay that death, no punishment, nothing. So with the greybeard whose son sins against the king and is hanged, he stands watching his child swing on the gallows, lamenting, helpless, while his flesh and blood hangs for the raven to pluck. He can raise his voice in sorrow, but revenge is impossible. And every morning he remembers how his son died, and despairs. No son to come matters, no future heir to a father forced to live through such misery. The place where his son once dwelled, before death compelled him to journey away, is a windy wasteland, empty, cheerless. The childless father shudders seeing it. So riders and ridden sleep in the ground. Pleasure is gone, the harp is silent, and hope is forgotten. Ugh. So that's a chapter. They come to the lair of the dragon, the stone guardian of all of this ancient treasure. And Beowulf is Beowulf's melancholy. He's straight up weary. He knows. We hear that Beowulf is going to die. This is going to be his last hurrah. His heart was heavy. His soul sensed how close fate had come. He felt something, not fear. It wasn't fear. Beowulf was not afraid, but knowledge of old age. Yikes. I must admit, I too have felt not fear, but knowledge of old age. When you realize that you are not as strong, not as fast, not as able as you once were. It happens to the best of us. It happened to me. It happened to Beowulf, for God's sakes. Yeah. His armor was strong, but his arm hung like his heart. Sad. And there's definitely a sense in here that, obviously, I mean, we see over and over again in this story, we hear, yes, age comes for us all, that living to an old age is, in some ways it's good, but in some ways it's not so good. There's definitely an appeal to dying a young man in battle, maybe more so than living to become an old, decrepit man. Yeah. And then we hear this, again, we're getting more details, so now we find out more about Beowulf's upbringing, right? That he was given over as probably like a hostage kind of, or like a trade situation, and then his lords had 3 sons originally, including Hairbald. I should spell that. Hairbald. It's not Hairball. Hairbald. Hairbald. I'm gonna just go with that. Yeah, and then we get again this really sad story about the father whose son died, and how nothing can ever make up for that, and you will be sad forever. And on that high note, we will end today's reading. So that was chapter 34. So we're on to 35. And so yeah, 35 of 43. So we'll definitely finish on Monday, and we'll wrap up talking about the whole story. Oh, Rabid Wombat, there you go. Look at that. Thank you so much, Rabid Wombat. That's awesome. And see, it's cool stuff like that. And again, like, there's no, who knows? It's just a story. But to try to tease out these details and try to figure out, like, what could be, is there science in here, right? Was this a tale? Was part of this tale about, like, as somebody mentioned, is this a reference to a volcano? Was there at some point in these people's stories, was there Was there a tale of destruction? Was there a fire so hot once that it melted stone, and like that stuck in their heads, and they're trying to figure out how that could have happened? Oh, it was a dragon that did it. You know, only a dragon's fire could have been hot enough to melt stone. Like maybe, you know, it's interesting to think about, are these details in there? What's, you know, where did these stories come from? Why were these people telling these stories? That's why I get it. Why I'm so interested in all of these ancient tales. Partly why, I guess. But yes, fun stuff. That was great. I'm loving Beowulf. I'm loving doing the reading. I do apologize that my children were so loud today. It happens. Not much I can do about it. Benjamin is he is in kindergarten, and they're, oh, that's weird. They're so he's on the class, but it's the schedule is really weird with people going in and out. It's not much I can do about it. Huh. I went to Twitch and it gave me like this really weird view that I haven't seen before. Because of course it did, right? The background sounds, yeah. That beeping was, it's a coding toy for kids. It's this long, oh, hold on, whoa, why is that making noise? Don't do that, don't do that. Okay. Sorry about that. It's a coding caterpillar, so each segment has a different movement or action that it can make. So you build the caterpillar and then start it, and then it goes through each segment and operates that, whatever that thing is. So it's actually really cool, but it makes a lot of noise. And the baby was like, oh, let's press this button. Boop. And then started the whole thing. Yeah, so that was Beowulf. That was part 4. And yes, we will finish up next time with part 5. That will be the end of Beowulf. So if you've been following along, make sure you're here on Monday. We'll finish it on Mythology Monday. And then we'll, oh, that's true. So we'll finish up the reading. We'll do an overview of the whole story. And we'll talk about what is going to be next. I have some ideas, so I'll try to grab things and decide what it'll be. Cool. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining me today, me and my loud family. Hopefully everybody has a great day today. We'll be back tomorrow with Figure Friday. What are we gonna do for Figure Friday? Maybe do some more painting on the Locus here. Got some ideas about where I want to go with the stuff that's not painted yet. Got just a lot of like this clothing and armor stuff. I've got this cyborg foot, and then obviously a lot more details on the head. And then I got to do something about this gun. Didn't work layering the contrast black over the silver. It didn't look the way I wanted it to, so I got to come up with a different plan for the gun. But anyway, maybe I'll work on that. Maybe I'll build models. Who knows? But it'll be fun. I promise you, stimulating conversation. Good, Rabbit Wombat. I'd love to see all the stuff that you people are working on as well. All right, have a great day. I will pass everybody over. Let's check out what Ven is doing. Watch Ven. And I'll be back tomorrow. Close that. Okay, cool. Raid is going to start in mere seconds. Thanks everybody for joining me, and have a great day. What else is there to say? I don't know. With that, goodbye. Oh man. Why is Vash watching that and not me?
Benjamin, Rubin. Maximilian, no thank you.
Dingus, 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 dingus.
Okay, that is the